Principle 10 is trust and verify. Explain the importance of the trust, verify, due diligence principle during negotiations.
I'm quite familiar with Ronald Reagan and Reykjavik, who didn't coin the phrase trust but verify, but he certainly popularized it when negotiating, I think, with Gorbachev. I changed trust but verify to trust and verify, really to make a fairly simple point, which is that there are no agreements without trust. You know, the trust but language sort of takes away from the word trust, and when you say trust but verify, it makes it seem like all the emphasis is on the verify. There are no treaties that can be signed, there are no contracts that can be signed that don't have an element of trust to them. If you sign a contract with an employer and that employer promises to pay you $1 gazillion a year for the rest of your life, you're trusting that they'll still be around, that some lawyer won't find a loophole in it. There's always some level of trust when you enter into an agreement with another party. And without some level of trust, there can be no agreement. You'll never get there. And you just can't protect against everything. I can tell you about a deal I lost. It was with a Japanese company because the Japanese were quite used to contracts that were short and basically say we're each going to do the right thing for each other, versus the Americans who insisted on very long, detailed contracts in an attempt to protect the client from every possible thing that could possibly go wrong, no matter how unlikely. The Japanese came at it from the perspective of a wedding contract, and the Americans came at it from the perspective of a prenup. We never got to a deal. It just became too hard, and the Japanese walked away from it. So the trust part is important, and that means you have to know the people on the other side. You have to know your own capabilities, and you have to figure out whether you can trust them. But trust alone is foolish. You do have to verify. And in the merger and acquisition world, that process of verifying is often referred to as due diligence reviews. Due diligence reviews is something that comes out of a legal term. Given Sarbanes-Oxley, other laws in the US and Europe and Asia, CEOs can be held personally liable in some cases, and their companies can be subject to lawsuit if they enter into agreements in which they did not exercise due care and due diligence to make sure that everything was proper and above board. And some of these due diligence reviews can be extremely detailed. And we help buyers to conduct due diligence reviews when we're working with the buyer. When we're working with sellers, we usually help them manage the due diligence review by the buyer. And sometimes you have to do both, because if we're working with a seller, but the buyer is, for example, going to pay you over time, then we have to ascertain that the buyer has the wherewithal to pay you over time. If the buyer is going to pay you with stock, we have to do some work to verify that the stock is actually worth something. There was a case written up in the New York Times a few years ago in which a husband and wife started a company in the voice recognition business. Think of Siri on your phone. You know, developed a voice recognition capability that could be used in a variety of ways. It was an attractive company. There were a number of people who were interested in buying it. They were advised by a well-respected investment banking firm. They solicited bids with the advice of their bankers, accepted an all-stock offer from a company. A few months later, it was revealed that that company that paid them with stock wasn't doing as well as they told people. The stock cratered, the company went bankrupt, the stock became worthless. So now the husband and wife no longer had their company and had a bunch of worthless stock. Now, in many cases you would say, that's the breaks, sorry that happened. The only thing a bit odd here was that the bankers that had advised them, that firm also had a private equity arm. The private equity arm had looked into investing into the company that bought them and had done due diligence on that company and had come to the conclusion that there was no way that they would buy that stock. The point was that it was possible to do due diligence and to ascertain that that stock might not be worth what the buyers said it was worth. And it wasn't done. Now, in that case, the husband and wife sued and they lost. And the courts held that it is not the banker's responsibility to do due diligence. It was the banker's responsibility to give their best considered advice, and it was up to the husband and wife as to whether they took that advice. And from a legal standpoint, I get that. From a moral high ground standpoint, I get, it's my opinion, that the banker should have helped them do better due diligence.